Good afternoon, everybody. We are continuing learning about the laws of sitting in the sukkah. Very big mitzvah, which is coming up this Friday night. We are in the Mishnah Berurah, Siman Tafresh Lamed Tes. We're going to start from the beginning of that Siman, and that is Siman 639. So if you have Mishnah Berurah and you want to follow along, I'm going to be reading the text inside and trying to explain it as we go along. So says the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, Ketzad mitzvahs yeshivas b'sukkah. How do we perform the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah? Shia ochel v'shose. The Rama adds v'yashin u'metayel v'dar b'sukkah kol shivas hayamim ben b'yom ben b'layla kederech shehudar b'beis u'b'shari mas hashana. The mitzvah. How do we do the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah? That we eat, we drink, we sleep, and we do our things, and we live in the sukkah all 7 days like we live in our house during the rest of the year. Bein biyom ben b'layla, during the day and at night. Kederech shehudar b'beis u'b'shari mas hashana. V'chol Shivas Yamim, Ose Adam as Beis Horai Vesukase Keva. In all the 7 days of Sukkot, we should make the Sukkah our main residence and our house our secondary residence, not our primary residence. It should be Arai. Ketzad, how so? Kalim Hanaim, Umetzos Hanos Besukkah. We should, our nice vessels, the stuff like Kalim, vessels, then our nice things should be used in the Sukkah. Umatzos hanos, the nice bedding should be used in the sukkah. Ukli shtia, kagona shishos, v'kosos b'sukkah, the goblets and vessels and cups that you use, right? The fancy silverware should be used in the sukkah. That's the word I was looking for, silverware. Avoklei achila, but the stuff used for cooking food, like pots and stuff, lachar achila, kigon kederos v'kairos chutz l'sukkah, like pots and pans and things like that, that should be outside of the sukkah. We're going to see that it's like not appropriate, respectful to have, like it's talking about like the pot that you cook the food in. After you eat, that shouldn't like hang around in the sukkah. That should be removed. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to discuss that a little more. Hamenorah b'sukkah, the lamp. Your lamp should be in a sukkah. It's talking about like a lamp with fire. V'im haisa sukkah katana manicha chutz l'sukkah. But if you have a small sukkah, then you should put the menorah outside. Seems like we are worried about a fire. And we'll see how the Mishnah Berurah explains that. Says the Rama, V'al yasa shum tashmish bozoi b'sukkah. One should not do any denigrating action in the sukkah. Kadei shalei mitzvahs b'zuyas alav, so that mitzvahs shouldn't be denigrated. The sukkah is a very holy place. The God's presence dwells on the sukkah during Sukkot, so we have to act accordingly, even though we're supposed to live there like we live in our house the whole year. But it's very important that we treat it with respect because God's presence is there and it's a mitzvah. We're going to see that it's a very bad sin to speak lashon hara, to speak evil speech in the sukkah. Okay, so let's read the Mishnah Berurah, who's going to explain what we just read. Ketzad umisha iyavshar lo lasos sukkah ela me'ever hanar. V'tzarich la'aver b'sfina katana o al yedei ma'aver shekorer prom l'sham yesh makim la'aver ba'al yedei shego yavionu mishum shehu l'dvar mitzvah aval harbe machmir mazeh. Very interesting case. He says, let's say you don't have a sukkah, and it's yantiv, and the only sukkah that's available is across a river, and the only way that you can get across a river is by hiring someone who isn't Jewish to take you across the river. So that is a rabbinic prohibition, to hire a non-Jew to take you across the river on a boat or on a barge or something like that, or on a ferry, whatever it is. I was just in Atlantic Highlands and I saw a lot of ferries to New York City. But it's a rabbinic prohibition to ask them to take you across the river on Yontiv. So are you allowed to violate a rabbinic prohibition in order to perform a mitzvah? So usually there are leniencies for that. But the Mishnah Berurah says that some are lenient, but he says there are those that are stringent. So we have a debate here if one is allowed to ask a non-Jew on Yontiv to take him across a river to get to a sukkah. In Manalapan, I don't think we have any rivers that are that big that we would need to do this. And if anyone doesn't have a sukkah, please send me a message and we could try to hook you up with something, try to work something out. Okay. V'yashin u'metayel, the Ramah said that one should sleep and do other actions in the sukkah. V'chein im yirtze l'saprim chavero yisapr b'sukkah. All of your action should be in the sukkah. Even if you just want to talk to your friend, you should do it in the sukkah. Speak in the sukkah. Tzarich lios kibeso, because it b'chol hashanu, k'moshe mesayim mechaber, because the sukkah has to be like your house, like the mechaber wrote. Lofi shekedushas sukkah gedola ma'od. Since the holiness of the sukkah is very great, roy l'mayit ba b'divrei chol. One should minimize his non-holy speech. U'ledaber ba ki'im kedusha v'torah, and he should try to speak only in holy things in Torah. Right? If you can, since it's a holy place, like in synagogue. When you're in synagogue, you shouldn't talk about the Yankees and other mundane matters. You shouldn't talk about Biden and Trump, the election. You should focus, when you're in synagogue, you should talk about Torah and holy matters. The same thing you should try to do in the sukkah. V'kol shechein, all the more so, she's zahir meladaber sham lashon hara. One has to be careful to not speak lashon hara in the sukkah, or rechilos, or tail bearing, v'shar dibur ha'asurim, or other prohibited forms of speech. Kiyon hashishos v'kosos v'afilu hein shel cheres. He says that one should bring in his vessels, his goblets that he drinks out of, and even if they're earthenware vessels, it seems like earthenware vessels, they could get gross. So what we're worried about here is that we don't want to bring anything into the sukkah that's going to kind of be gross and nasty. So, but he says that's not an issue. One doesn't have to worry about that when it comes to drinking cups like that, because one is they don't get nasty even when you're finished with them, and also people drink the whole day, so it's okay to have them in the sukkah. But that's going to be compared to cooking utensils. We'll see why. But cooking utensils, v'kelim shemashin behem kemach, v'harevos shaloshin behem, or the vessels that are used to knead dough and things like that. Shaloshin behem v'kelim shel b'samim, or vessels that are used to hold spices. She'ein derech lahachziken b'diraso rak bebeis hachitzon. But I guess back in the day, these types of vessels that were used to cook, and to store spices, people didn't leave them in their house. They had like an outdoor house where they would leave these specific vessels in. Hakol b'chal klei achila. So that's why you don't bring them into the sukkah, because we have to do what we would do the rest of the year. So the rest of the year, you wouldn't bring these things in your house, so you don't bring them in the sukkah. V'chein kado deli sheshovim b'mayim, or minanar, or they used to have buckets that they would get water from the river, the water carrier. Hakol chutz l'sukkah, that should all be outside the sukkah. Uklal adavar kol she'ein darka lios b'diraso shedarbo ein lo lahachziku b'sukkah. He says that anything that you wouldn't have in your house, you shouldn't have in the sukkah. Okay, let's do one more sif katan here, or one or two. La'achar achila kigon kederis v'karis meloshin zeh mashma l'chayre de b'shas achila gam kederis mutter lahachnisin b'sukkah v'l'aris l'toch hakara v'olim nisharin mehakadera lahachniso l'toch hasukkah af kodem achila v'noy dechshashal l'dezem achmirin b'kdera. I'll translate in a second. B'chol gavne v'efshir tegam das v'shulchan aruch kein u'befrat mi she'ein darko gam bebeso lehevi hakadera l'shulchano ela ma'ara l'toch hakadera b'beis achitzin b'vadei yish tizamrizim v'kol makom mi she'ein lo kli v'tzarech la'echel min hakadera mutter lahachniso. Okay, I just read the whole thing. I'll translate the whole thing. There's two types of vessels that we use to eat. We have plates, we have forks and knives. So obviously all of that is in the sukkah, because how else are you going to eat in the sukkah? What he's discussing here is the pot where you cook the food in. So he brings different opinions. It sounds like the best thing to do, should you bring those things into the sukkah? So it sounds like the best thing to do is to not serve the food in like the pot you cooked it in, but to put it on like a serving tray and then bring it into the sukkah, and not to actually bring the pot where you cook the food into the sukkah. However, he says if you don't have other serving pots, then that's okay. You know what? Actually, let's just finish this sif. We're very close to the end here. Okay, chutz l'sukkah. He says, even though you shouldn't bring in all of these vessels, which can be, kind of denigrate the sukkah, you don't want to bring, like, especially after eating, the even if you bring the pots in, and they have, like, gunk in them, you shouldn't leave them in the sukkah after you're eating, because that's, like, not a nice thing to do. But even if you do that, it doesn't, like, make the sukkah not kosher. There's a custom not to bring in a clay earthenware lamp in the sukkah, v'chein mikdash al cheres, or a clay pottery bowl. Okay, v'afilu chadasha ein kedai kol kach. It sounds like these things they can get gross. Umetzupa bikunya, even if it's covered with a glaze, din clay zechukas yeshlo umuter. Oh, sorry. If it's covered with a glaze, it has the law of glass. and you're allowed to bring it in a sukkah. So earthenware vessels, don't bring them in the sukkah. But if it's an earthenware vessel that is covered with glass, then you can bring it in the sukkah. The im haisa sukkah katana. If you have a small sukkah, we said you shouldn't bring in a lamp, right, a fire, because we're worried, it's going to burn. Afilu einam mitzum samas b'shir. Even if it's not the smallest sukkah, right? We have something in the Gemara where it's like a super tiny sukkah that like really just one guy could fit in there. But even if not, even if it's just a small sukkah, elashi katana kol kach b'nin sheyesh lachu sham miskar v'ner ledofnei sukkah v'achas b'emaner the tishrei sukkah tzarich lahanicha chutz l'sukkah afilu hishal zav. Says even if you have a golden lamp, but you have a small sukkah and there's a worry that it's going to catch fire outside the sukkah. V'imat beohu mitztar kishaochel shlo b'makam haner yesh lahakol kishiyamed haner ba'asasis shakar and the lantern. Or if it's very difficult to you for eating the sukkah, if it's very difficult to eat in the sukkah without the lamp in the sukkah, then you could put it on some sort of base. He called the lantern oba menorah shakar and lanpin in Yiddish, which sounds like English. Im lo shehi nemucha ma'od, unless it's very not, as long as it's not very low. V'yishlach shizkar va'or laschach. Okay, shum tashmish bazai kigon shtifas kairos. We said you shouldn't do anything that's denigrating to the sukkah. So you shouldn't clean your vessels in the sukkah, your pots and pans. But you're allowed to, because it's like a kpeda, but to clean glasses, that you're allowed to do. I haven't seen anyone who has a sink in the sukkah. I feel like there are people that have that, maybe like on the deck. They have their sukkah on the deck, and maybe they have like a sink outside. But I haven't seen that myself. One should not urinate in the sukkah, even though he does it in his house, right? Back in the day, they used to have chamber pots. So if you have your chamber pot in the sukkah, you shouldn't use it in the sukkah. You should go out of the sukkah. But I don't think that's relevant so much to us nowadays, but it's still important to learn it. Okay, that was the first seif in Hilchos Sukkah, Tafresh Lamed Tes. If anyone needs a sukkah, has any questions about sukkah, or just wants to say hi, please send me a message.